Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off, because today I'll be sharing a Kickstarter preview of Legion of War from Eclectic Nerds. And I'll get started right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Yes, I'm Jeff McAleer, back once again as your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, today I'm going to be sharing a Kickstarter preview of the new trading card game, which is on the horizon from Eclectic Nerds. It is Legion of War, and it is a near future war game. It is a strategy game where each of the players is leading a faction in battle against other players around the table. Of course, you can easily play this game with 2 players. I would say you could probably go up to about 4 or 5, all depending, and I will get into that when I talk about my final thoughts on Legion of War. Before I jump into that, though, let me point out, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you do. Don't forget, ring that bell, because it will not only notify you when I upload standalone videos such as this, it'll also inform you when the Daily Dope streams live Monday through Thursday nights on YouTube. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, comics, movies, TV. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. So, we are going to be taking a look at Legion of War, which is coming to Kickstarter very shortly from Eclectic Nerds. And as I pointed out, this is a near future kind of setting. So there's a bit of a science fiction vibe to some of the forces, while other forces are basically real world units with maybe the serial numbers kind of filed off and name changes, but pretty similar to most forces that are available out there in the world right now. The object of Legion of War is to have the last leader standing. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to dive in and take a look at the variety of different cards that are in Legion of War, and let's start off with the leaders. I've got a couple of the leaders here. There are a variety of leaders you'll be able to utilize. You will have decks that are available, which are faction decks. Of course, those will also include a leader, and there are going to be booster packs, which leaders will be included in booster packs as well. So the breakdown of a leader card, we're going to basically see the name of that leader. We get some artwork, an indication that, yes, this is a leader card. Each player will only have 1 leader, and they will be out at all times on the battlefield in the war zone. We see here attack value. There's no attack value for the leader, and 150 health, which these points are deducted as the leader takes damage. Leaders, buildings, and territories all have permanent damage. So if you attack and you do damage but you don't destroy it, that damage will carry over. Other force cards, that is not the case. In combat, anything that does not wipe them out doesn't carry over into the next turn. We also get to see that the starting morale for Chancellor Lockwood's faction would be 19. The pirate Thedo Lethabo would be 16. I certainly recommend just simply use a 20-sided die to track morale. Now, it is possible to gain morale as well and have more than 20, so you might want to have some 10-sided dice hanging around as well that you can add in to the mix. I am hoping that we will see some sort of trackers that are available maybe as a stretch goal. I will talk about that in just a bit, because there are a variety of different things that you're going to be keeping track of. One of them being morale, the other is health. So as I mentioned, any damage that these leaders take is permanent, does carry over. So we need something to be able to mark how much damage they have taken. Now, of course, you can, obviously enough, use a piece of paper and a pen or pencil if you'd like to as well. We also see that the leaders have special abilities. And when we see these icons, that means these are countdowns. So these are countdown timers. So we have Chancellor Lockwood's got loyalty, draw 2 cards. Then we got nuclear bombs, which they can use to destroy territory in other in other areas for various other factions, so they can drop nuclear bombs. I recommend 6-sided dice, and you're going to want to make sure that you've got a variety of different dice because you're going to have different countdown timers. For an example, we've got 2 here on Chancellor Lockwood. We would maybe want to do something like that and mark the leader card with dice to show the countdown timers. Every turn, you're going to drop these down further on timers, like so, until the special ability would be available to you. We also get a little bit of flavor text and a reminder that if that unit is eliminated, if you lose your leader, it is game over. You are out. But you can't attack leaders until your enemy has no morale left, or they have no territories left, or they no longer have any cards in their arsenal, which is effectively their deck, their 60-card deck that they start off with. You cannot directly attack leaders until one of those 3 conditions is met. So, speaking of territories, let's take a look at a couple of those. So we see here we've got St. Purcell Harbor, we've got the Drayton oil fields. Shows that these are territories and they provide us with resources that we are going to be able to utilize to build our forces. So the harbor provides us with 2 equipment each turn. The oil fields provide us with 1 fuel each turn. Each of these happens to take 400 points of damage, so their health is 400. They have no attack value whatsoever. And you lose morale if they're eliminated. So morale is actually a currency that you'll utilize. So there are morale cards. I will show some of those in just a moment, where you can actually spend morale to have an effect take place. So these are a couple of these. Then for an example, we've got the biofuel research farms, the Fermi energy plants. So the energy plants provide us with power. The research farms provide us with either food or fuel. Do want to also mention that about half of the cards that I did receive for this preview do not have art yet, which I can completely understand, but do want to point that out. I'm trying to show cards that have art, but the 2 factions that I received don't use a lot of food. So the territories included, this is the only one I've got that provides food. So I do want to show that because you have the different products that you're going to utilize to build your forces. So we have food, we have fuel, we have power, and we also have equipment. We also have generic products, which generic products can be any of the 4 products. It can be food, fuel, power, equipment, and they count as a generic product. Also want to point out that, as an example, maybe you need power, but you don't have any power. You can spend any 2 resources of any kind to replace a specific resource that you need. Let's look into some of the force cards. So we're going to have soldiers. We have Private Sarah Yvette, and we have the G6R75 drone. To give you an idea of the different soldiers, if we take a look down at the bottom, these chevrons, they kind of give us an idea of how rare these cards are as well. So Private Yvette, pretty common card. The drone is a little bit more rare. So we have up to 4 marks on the chevrons here. First thing we're going to take a look at is the countdown timer. So our force units will show a countdown timer, and that's going to tell us how many turns does it take once we purchase this unit for it to arrive in the war zone on the battlefield. These show us 0 turns. So once we purchase these are available, they are on the battlefield. So the private here is going to cost us 1 generic product. So any product, any resource would allow us to purchase this unit here. As far as the drone, it's a bit more expensive. It's going to cost us a generic as well as power. And as we look further down, we're going to see why we have a bit more expense involved. It's because this is a more powerful unit, and it actually has a special ability as well. Whereas the private here, this simply has an attack of 20 and a health of 10. The drone has an attack of 40 and health of 30, and it is a stealth unit. So when this card attacks, it cannot be blocked by any other card that does not have stealth. So in order to block this drone, my opponent would have to have units that have stealth abilities as well. I'm going to give you an idea of a couple more of these soldiers here. So we have Agent Zevi, is my guess. She's a spy. So we have intel as well. So we're going to be tracking intel, and we have different intel cards that we can play, but not everyone is going to be able to play intel cards. We'll talk about those in just a moment. So this is a card that's going to come out immediately once we pay 1 generic and 1 food. An attack value of 20, health of 10, gives us +3 intel, and this is a stealth card. And then we've got Sergeant Orlov. Need 2 power. He's a heavy soldier, so he's actually got an attack of 80 and a health of 50, armored and bulletproof. So, and this is a bit more rare for this card here than for this agent as well. We've got tanks. Get some tanks out here. We'll show these off. Each of these is going to require a countdown of 1. This would cost fuel and equipment. This would cost generic fuel and equipment, showing us the different tanks. This tank is basically doesn't have any special ability, but it has an attack of 90, health of 40. The Tiger here is a blitz. So that means if it's blocked, excess attack damage actually gets past this card and would affect whatever it was attacking, be it a building, a territory, or a leader. We do see the countdown of 1. So what happens here is once we pay this, once we pay the products, in order to bring this out, we're going to actually lay that face down on the battlefield, and we're going to utilize a die to give us our countdown timer. That's why when you're playing Legion of War, you're going to want to have a big honking handful of dice. So we've got the tanks, we've got air units, we've got the Hornet, we've got the Wasp. Normally, when you're attacking with units, ground units can block other ground units, air units can block other air units, and we have naval units as well, which I will show in a few moments. But then we do have some that have special abilities. So here we've got the Hornet, generic and a power, 60-20. It can evade. So during battle, damage to this force is avoided. We've got the Wasp. The Wasp has anti-ground weapons, so it can actually block army and soldier forces in battle. So it can not only block air units, it can also block ground units that are army and soldier forces. Then we get some really expensive kind of units like the Mech. the Apex 55 mech. As you can see, this costs us quite a bit, so we will be saving up for this unit for a while if we're playing with this in our arsenal. It does take 2 turns once it's been purchased. Well, look at that. 240 and 200. It's armored, and it is an anti-air weapon, so it can block air forces as well. This is one tough unit. Expensive, but it is tough. We also have naval units. That's right. So naval units can only be blocked by, you guessed it, naval forces. So this is the Ghost Mantra sub. I will point out I did not see a lot of naval units. That there's overall 200 cards. So grand total 200 cards. And I did not see a bunch of naval units. I have seen a couple of subs so far, as well as some mines. Moving along, we've got buildings. Got different building cards. And here's an example of the mines, the underwater mines here. So we've got a Titan X missile silo. So when you bring buildings out, you should normally put the buildings out onto the war zone, into the battlefield, and just leave them there. You can, if you want, you can put them with your territories, but it's easy for people to forget the building is there as opposed to a territory. So it shows, okay, so this is a Titan X missile silo. So an attack of 160. It's got a health of 50. It's in an undisclosed location. So opponents can't specifically attack this card. Then we get a countdown timer of 2 to launch. Of course, it's launching its missile, right? And if this is eliminated, we lose morale. We have underwater mines. Only costs us a generic product to bring out on the table. Immediately available. Once again, undisclosed location, anti-naval weapon, dead man. So if this card is eliminated from battle, eliminate the source that caused it. So basically takes out whatever took it out. We have morale cards. We have morales that cost us morale. We've got morale cards that add morale. We could see overtime production. Costs us 6 morale, so we would be counting down our morale, 6 points. But it would allow each of our territories to produce 1 additional product that they're able to produce. We have visit from our leader, which would gain us 3 morale. So then we have the intel cards. And the intel cards are kind of interesting because you can only play intel cards if you have the highest intel or you're within 5 points. If you are 6 or more points in intel away, you can't play intel cards. So let's say, for an example, I've got a 4 in intel. Somebody else, anybody else, if I'm the leader, anybody else can play intel cards. Now, if I were a 6 in intel, then, and nobody else is within, say nobody has any other intel, I'm the only person who can play intel cards. We have weather. We got weather cards. Weather cards are special cards. They come into play, they last 1 turn, but they will have effects on the war zone, on the battlefield itself. Then we also have weapons of mass destruction. And there are some pretty wild weapons of mass destruction out here. You can see this drone invasion, very expensive to bring out, but all non-drone soldiers for a specific opponent are eliminated. Holy cow, right? That's pretty powerful. As you can see, the relatively rare card. We have the virus outbreak, which in this day and age right now, we're living through one. This kind of gives you an idea of this also with the countdown timers as well. So now that we've looked at the cards, let's move along and take a peek at how do we play Legion of War. Here I've laid out an example of kind of my starting area here. So I've got my leader, I've got my 4 territories, I've got my arsenal, and we will also start with a hand of 8 cards. The first turn, you're not going to draw a new card. So the way your turn will progress is draw a card, as long as it's not the first turn. Then you're going to reduce your timers. So as an example, I have these timers here for Chancellor Lockwood. I would count it down to a 1 and a 4 for my loyalty and my nuclear bombs. I don't have any other timers that I would reduce. If I had anything here in the war zone that was face down with a die on it to count down, I would reduce that as well. Next, I would produce products. So my territories actually produce a generic product, a power product, 2 equipment, and a choice of food or fuel. I will say let's take food this time. And what you can do is actually you can place these underneath, or if you want to do something like that or something like this. What I would probably recommend, because you only have a certain number of these cards, these product cards, based on what deck you've got, the like pre-designed deck, I would recommend you actually use 10-sided dice. Now I know I'm talking about a lot of dice here as far as countdowns and morale and the various different amounts of damage that different territories and buildings and leaders will take. But it makes it a little bit easier because, as an example, I only have 3 food cards in the 2 decks that I received as a preview. Well, if I'm not spending food, I'm going to run out of these food cards pretty quickly. So it's much easier for you just to take, even if you want to take a 20-sided die and track them that way. If you're a gamer and you've got loads and loads of different dice, you can easily pull this off. The reason why I mention this is it's just a lot easier on the tabletop as opposed to having all these different cards and things like that all over the place. Now, of course, you could even utilize just a piece of paper and a pen as well. Or you can just simply do something like that. You can just simply place whatever resources are available underneath your territory. But once again, now you're sitting there messing around, taking these cards out all the time. So as I mentioned, you can either use the cards and use dice, or, I mean, honestly, you can even do something along the lines of this. Just place it right on the card on top of, so these biofuel research farms give me a choice. I could do something like, okay, well, I've got one of these, right? Just to kind of keep the game table fairly clear, because it'll get to the point where you're going to have cards all over the place, especially if, as an example, you're playing more than 2 players. Once you have your products, now you move on to primary actions. And primary actions include using any of the special abilities that you've got on your cards, as well as purchasing and placing units out into the war zone, out to the battlefield. So I did get 1 generic. I could easily spend a generic. I can bring Private Yvette out into the war zone. She has a countdown timer of 0. So I've also got power. I've got, let's say I take fuel, and I have the equipment, and I have power. I could conceivably play this tiger, but because it has a timer of 1, I would have to flip this over and place a die on here as my countdown timer. So that's not out on the battlefield just yet. The way the rules are written, you're supposed to take the various different resources that you needed to produce a unit that is flipped over, has a countdown timer, and you're supposed to put them with it. Once again, that to me, that's just creating a lot of mess on the table. Just take it out of your supply. Show your opponent, hey, I'm paying for the production of this unit, and place it out. It's not going to be any big secret what you've laid out there in the production. So once you've done that, once you've done your primary actions, now you move into attacking or passing. So what you'll do is you're going to attack the opponent. I'm going to actually pull this out a little bit. Got cards in that all over the place. I'm going to pull these down. Let's kind of give you an idea. And let's say, as an example, my opponent here doesn't have anybody defending him yet. Now, this didn't cost us any time to bring this out onto the table. Unlike many other trading card games, there is no, well, I brought that out onto the table this turn, I can't use it this turn. That's what these countdown timers are for. So I could use Private Yvette to attack. And let's say, for an example, we've got, there's my opponent's morale. So as I mentioned earlier, the only way you can attack the opponent's leader is if they have no territories left, their morale is 0, or they have no cards left in their arsenal. Otherwise, you cannot directly attack their leader. So I would have Private Yvette. She's able to attack. She has an attack value of 20. She has a health of 10. So I could say, okay, I am going to have Yvette attack the power plants, just as an example. So there's nothing to block. I would do 20 points of damage. And this is where you start getting into, well, you've got to either track this stuff on a piece of paper with a pencil or pen, or create tokens like, say, 10, 50, and 100 that you can place, because the damage here is permanent. These cards here, including buildings, I'll toss a building out as an example. Let's say that was out here. Buildings also take permanent damage. Force units do not. So if you've got army units, tanks, aircraft, submarines, naval units, any of those do not take permanent damage. If you don't wipe it out in that turn, then it is going to stay in play. So as an example here, I would say, okay, well, let's pretend that this would be a token, and maybe it's a 10. Maybe I have a couple of tokens I would put on there to mark how much damage. Or what you could do is you could sit there and just use percentile dice and have it where you've got, all right, where's the 30? There we go. So use that as the hundreds, use this as the tens, and mark that off as 380 points left. Once again, as I mentioned, a lot of dice are being involved to try to track things. If you don't want to just sit there and have a bunch of stuff, like jot down your territories and just marking it off with pen and paper. I personally would like to see, maybe as a stretch goal, or maybe as something that's included in the booster packs for Legion of War, maybe a little punch card with little tokens, which would have damage. As I mentioned, like maybe 10, 50, 100, and that way you just kind of stack the tokens up on these as well. As an example, let's say that now our opponent has units to defend. And of course, you wouldn't be this close together when you're playing at the table. As an example here, when I attacked with my private, once the attack is completed, if my unit survives, I'm going to turn it around so it's coming towards me. So that shows that it attacked and it's on its way back to me, because that means I can't use this to block another player when they attack. So as an example, if the next turn came around and I've got these two units here, if I decide, let's say it's the other player's attack, they can attack me with 80, I can block with this Tiger tank. So I can block their attack. They can't do any damage to me, and I would actually destroy their attacker. So this is very similar to other collectible card games, other trading card games, as far as attacking and blocking. There aren't a ton of different special rules. There is blitz. For an example, this has a blitz. So if I attacked with the tiger, and when you attack, you say, okay, so my tiger here is attacking the wolf powered plant district, and there's my attack there. Oh, this is attacking over here, the Drayton oil fields. So you can have multiple units attacking the various different territories or buildings, and then it's up to the defender to decide how do they want to block those attacks. So as an example here, let's say it was my turn and I say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to attack with the tiger and Yvette, and they're both going to attack the harbor. Well, if they want to block with Sergeant Orlov, they have a choice of either blocking the tiger or blocking Yvette. So you can only block one unit with one card, so it's basically one-on-one. You might decide, okay, well, I'm going to block with the sergeant here, because then I can eliminate that unit there and just take the damage from the tiger tank. It would then come back to here, facing me this way. Now, when it comes to my opponent's turn, my opponent can attack using their sergeant. They can pick out what territory they want to attack. I don't have anybody left to block, so they would, of course, do damage to me. Flip that over. And then, of course, when it comes back to your turn, you just simply return your units facing outward so you can use them again. There are a variety of different special effects, special abilities to the different units that work pretty nicely. So for an example, like the sergeant here, he's not affected by anything that has the dead man ability, where a dead man ability is effectively if the sergeant takes another unit out and it has dead man, they would normally eliminate the unit that took them out. So almost like a self-destruct mechanism. Well, that doesn't happen with Sergeant Orlov. It's also bulletproof, so any unit that has a crack shot ability does not affect that as well. Just like the tiger has the blitz, so any leftover damage being blocked does carry over. Without a blitz, I could take, for an example, let's say the private was on this side here, and I attacked with the tiger. She could block the tiger attack, even though she only has a health of 10 and this has an attack of 90. She still blocks that attack. She would still be able to block that attack. It has the blitz. It would carry over. If it didn't, then she would be able to stop any damage from coming through. It's important to also keep in mind that for the most part, unless they have a special ability, ground troops can only block ground troops, air units can block air units, and naval units block naval units. Of course, there are a variety of different cards that change that. There are ground units that can actually block air units. There are air units that can block ground units, and so on and so forth. All just depends on the variety of different units that you have in your deck. I do want to point out, it's important if you are creating your own deck that you pay attention to what kind of resources does it take to bring your cards out onto the table, and don't sit there and fill your deck up with a lot of cards that are super expensive to bring out onto the table, because you will not have any territories left by the time you start bringing these bigger, badder units out. You can have up to 4 copies of any named card in your arsenal. Doesn't matter rarity, what have you, you can have. So if I want 4 tigers, I can have 4 tigers. If I want 4 of these mechs, I can have 4 of these mechs. Unlike other trading card games, your arsenal does not hold resources. Your resources, the products, come from your territories that you are defending. So you're going to continue drawing a new card, reducing your timers, producing your products, taking your primary actions, such as using special abilities of leaders and other cards, as well as bringing new units out onto the battlefield, paying for the units, and keeping in mind that if they have any countdown timers, you're going to drop your die there to show the countdown timer. Once you've done all that, you can choose to attack. You don't have to attack. You can always pass. And then it moves on to the other player's turn. Do want to mention, let's see, I didn't have any sitting here. Let's look in this deck. Ah, look, perfect. With the weather cards, you can bring weather cards out. You're going to kind of place them off to the side to show that it affects the entire war zone. And that stays in play for a full turn unless one of your opponents also plays a weather card. If they play a weather card, it would replace the weather card that's already out there. If it's not replaced by one of your opponents, when it comes back around to your turn, you're going to eliminate that weather card. So that is effectively how you're going to play the game. You're going to continue taking turns back and forth, trying to eliminate all of the territories. Hopefully you've got an opponent who's having to spend morale and losing morale because they're losing territories, or they run out of cards in their arsenal. Once that takes place, then you can actually focus on attacking their leader, bring them down to 0, and if you are the only player left with a leader on the table, then you are the winner. Effectively, that is how you play Legion of War. So let's move on over to the other camera, and I will share with you my final thoughts. All right, so I found Legion of War to be pretty interesting. Of course, I enjoy war games, so anything that's got kind of a conflict simulation aspect to it, I am always game to take a peek at. As far as the gameplay, it's very quick. There's not a lot to the game that you need to learn. So some trading card games out there, including the one that is called a collectible card game, and nobody else is supposed to be able to call their games collectible card games, does require to know a lot of different little specifics as far as how things are timed, what happens when, so on and so forth, because you're able to interrupt other players' turns doing things. That doesn't take place in Legion of War. Your turn, you're going to do the same types of things each turn. You're going to draw a card. If it's not the first turn, you're going to reduce your timers. You're going to produce your products, get your resources. You're going to take your primary actions, so you can utilize like your leader actions that have counted down. They're available to you. You can buy new units. And then, of course, finally, you can choose to attack with whatever units you want or decide to pass. And it's important to keep in mind that it doesn't make much sense for you to go all out in an attack early on, because you're going to find that your opponent's going to drop out low-cost units that can ping you back pretty good. And if you don't have anybody to defend with, kind of out of luck. All in all, like I said, pretty easy game to wrap your head around and get to play. Plays out 2 players once you get the hang of things. It does play in about 30 minutes, maybe even a little bit less than that. As you add more players into the mix, you are going to increase your playing time. 15 minutes or so per player if everybody knows what they're doing. Personally, I would not go more than maybe 4 or 5 players with this, because then it kind of starts to drag and you get way too many opportunities for people to dogpile on one specific faction. So, you know, you may only get to play for a couple of turns and all of a sudden it's like everybody's jumping on you. Got nobody to defend with. Plays out really nicely as a 2 or 3 player game though. So that is something you definitely want to keep in mind as well. As far as building up your own custom deck, very interesting aspects to that as well. There are no specific cards that are locked into any particular faction. Each of the leaders are pretty unique. They all have different skills available to them, special abilities as well. But depending on what territories you choose, really determines what units you're going to be able to bring out onto the war zone, into the battlefield. You want to point out too, when you're building up a custom deck, it's important to keep in mind you want to make sure you have territories that are going to be able to produce the sorts of units that you have in your arsenal. It's important to keep in mind, if you have an arsenal that uses a lot of power, as an example, you probably want to have more than one territory that generates power, because once again, you can use 2 of any one product to represent another product. For an example, I can use 2 food and fuel, or 1 fuel, 1 food, and that can get me, say, power. But if your enemy is really focused on a specific territory to take that out, it can throw a wrench into your plans. Also do want to point out that you can't attack leaders right off the bat. You have to make sure that the morale goes down to 0, which morale can burn out pretty quickly. So it's something to keep in mind. Also, you need to have no territories left for that opponent, or, so there's 3 different things. 1, morale is 0. 2, no territories left. And 3, they no longer have any cards to draw from their deck. Not having cards to draw from your deck does not mean you've lost the game. You can continue taking your turn. You're just simply not drawing any cards. And you can actually win not having any cards left if you've kind of whittled everybody else down, where it's kind of, you know, getting to the nitty gritty. And of course, whoever's got the last leader standing is the winner. Like the artwork, although I got to point out, there are about half the cards I received have no final artwork yet. So that kind of detracted a little bit from the vibe, because we were using some cards that had no artwork at all. So kind of missing the flavor with that. Of course, that's not going to be something that happens in the final Kickstarter. But once you do get your final product, there'll be artwork on all the cards. One thing that I do hope that the designers do kind of iron out is the variety of different timers that are being used, the various different tracking. So if you think about it, you're tracking the countdown timers for leaders and their special abilities. You've got countdown timers for units that come out into play that you've purchased, but they're not ready yet. So you've got those you're counting down. You've got morale that you're tracking. You've got the damage to each of the territories, buildings, and leaders as well. That is a lot of stuff that you're keeping track of at one time. It can be kind of confusing if you're not paying attention to it. And if you're just tracking it on a piece of paper and a pen, it's easy to forget or to not realize, oh, okay, so what does my opponent have? That's why, as I mentioned when we were taking a look at how to play the game, I really do hope that maybe as a stretch goal, there's something out there that allows the players to track various different damage much easier. Even if you're a gamer who has a lot of different board games, even if you were to use cubes represent, say, 10, 25, 50, 100 points of damage that you could easily just reach on into and plop down on the cards. That would make life so much easier. The other thing also you're tracking are the products. And as I mentioned before, depending on what deck you get, you only have a certain number of these product cards that you can utilize. So once again, that is something that I would like to see, little numeric discs, something, anything that you can utilize, because you will run out of the different product cards. It happened to us constantly. That's why we started actually using dice to track how many we had, and we were not using the product cards underneath our purchases that had a timer. We just showed our opponent, hey, I spent this, I'm going to put this down, face down, so on and so forth. All in all, I enjoyed Legion of War. It's light. It's not overly complex. So this is perfect to teach someone a trading card game without having to go into a whole slew of different timing mechanisms or things like that. I like the war game feel to it, where you're battling to destroy other territories. It's kind of cool. One of the leaders, you can steal territories from other players too, so it's as if you were destroying their territories. I found it to be very, very interesting. I like how the different units have different effects. And if you're creating a custom deck, then by all means, you really need to kind of study what different abilities each of these different force cards have. And of course, we're not even talking about weapons of mass destruction, intel. There's a variety of different ways to approach this to defeat your opponents. So all in all, I've really enjoyed it. I am very interested in seeing what the final product brings to the table. I can't give this a review score because this is not the finished product. Still waiting for more artwork. I do understand the designers are still tweaking the rules a little bit too, but this is definitely a Kickstarter. If you enjoy trading card games and you enjoy like conflict sim games, this is definitely one to keep an eye out for when it hits Kickstarter. All right, so that is it for this time out. I do want to point out, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And of course, subscribe to the channel. If you do, don't forget, ring that little bell. It will not only notify you when I upload standalone videos such as this, it will also tell you when my live show, The Daily Dope, airs Monday through Thursday nights right here on YouTube. So until next time, thanks for watching, and game on. Oh, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel by clicking right here. And of course, if you want to catch up on past episodes of The Daily Dope, check out this playlist. And if you'd like to see what YouTube's recommending you take a peek at from the channel, just give a click right over here. Of course, I'm Jeff McAleer, and once again, thank you very much for watching.